Aloha, I'm Ken Love.
And I'm Jane Tai.
And together we make up part of Hawaii Master Food Preservers. And today
we're going to talk about dehydration. But before we do that and talk about dehydration, what do we need to do?
Yeah, I know. Sanitize.
Okay, so let's do the tables first.
Okay. Hand washing time.
Yes.
You going to sing today or is it my turn?
It's your turn.
It's always my turn. Okay.
We'll be back.
See you in a bit.
Okay, so first things that we're actually going to do is we're going to dehydrate apple bananas. We've actually washed them, and then we're going to be using what I call the mandolin. But before we do that, because the mandolin is actually will give me even slices, I have left one hand ungloved because underneath the glove I will have what's called a cut resistance glove. So a cut resistance glove is where you have any sharp tool like a knife or whatever, and it won't cut through. Because the mandolin blade is a knife, I don't want to cut my fingers. And then on top of that, I will be gloving this. Because the glove is here, actually I need a larger size. Okay, so setting this up is really, I like the stainless steel mandolin because it's easier to wash and easier to sanitize.
Well, you can explain why it's so important to have it even.
Well, we'll show you when you have it even, it will dry or even more evenly when it's in the dehydrator. And essentially we're going to be using the dehydrator, and I'll explain the parts to you a little bit later. And actually what we have here is the tray that we will place the bananas on.
Now we're just going to put them on. Sometimes you can put a lot of different parchment paper, Silpats, what else is there? Other screens. Some people spray Pam on it. Some people put
mesh
screens, which I like for jackfruit if I'm dehydrating jackfruit. I don't do bananas because I can't do them anywhere near as good as Jane's bananas.
And I tend not to like to use anything on them. It's just going to be straight. So Ken's actually making sure that he gets all of as many of the threads out, because like any fruit, it will oxidize. In fact, actually, that's one of the things. If you want to stop a little bit of oxidation on the dehydrated, you could cover it in some citric acid. Some people like to use lemon juice, whichever, what you prefer. But do keep in mind that it will have flavor on the banana. What I like to do is make sure that our fruit that we're dehydrating is no more than 1/4 inch. This is actually a head spacer from pressure canning, from our canning, water bath canning, so you will see that it's actually marked with the 1/4 inch, and that is ballpark about where my slice of banana is. And then I take that and literally just place it.
So yeah, I think the importance is of having even slices is something you can't overemphasize enough. If you have it too thin or too thick, or you have some thin and some thick on the same sheet, it's going to come out very different. With some types of fruit like jackfruit, it's going to give you a totally different flavor profile. So it's important to really keep it even.
Part of it is also not just only flavor profile, but when you are dehydrating, think of a dehydrator, and I'll explain a little bit more, but think of a dehydrator as a very large hair dryer. It's a fan, and not all dehydrators will have fans, but it's a fan that actually blows hot air and hot air through the machine. And so what happens is that the hot air, your fruit will start to form a crust on the top, like you're baking a cake. And so it'll be on the top and the bottom. The hot air will penetrate, again, top and bottom, 1/8 in very evenly. When it's a little thicker, it will take longer. Now, people will say, okay, well, just dehydrate it for a longer time. The issue that has is if it's longer time, it still allows your center, which doesn't get the heat, to potentially form bacteria or allow the bacteria to grow, because you still have moisture, you have sugar, and now you have heat added to it.
I mean, how does it work if you were doing, the round the other way with the banana? Same thing, 1/4 inch?
It's the same thing. 1/4 inch is for any kind of slicing that you want, which is why, again, I use a mandolin as opposed to using my hand, because when you hand slice, first off, when you have a bunch of bananas going off in your farm, it's not going to be just one sheet. It's going to be ballpark between 10 to 20 pounds plus. So that's a lot of hand cutting by knife. Right. So this makes it even, and then...
Again, it relates back to cost of production. You want to minimize the amount of time that you spend on producing something, especially if you're going to sell it at a farmer's market.
We're done with the bananas at this point, and we're going to now put them in a machine. I'm going to have you hold this.
Oh, hold that?
You hold that.
I'll hold this.
You hold that. And this is actually, there's different kinds of dehydrators, round ones, without fans, as I mentioned. Stainless steel, rectangular, multi-tray, 4 trays, 6 trays. This happens to be a 10 tray. And what we're just really going to do is just place it straight in there. We like stainless, or I like stainless. Again, it's easy to clean, it's easy to sanitize. Once the tray is in there, then a couple of pieces, let me just close this and I'll explain so you can see, is that most of them will have a guide, and it'll tell you a guide of herbs, vegetables, fruits. And then you've got a timer and then temperature. These are not elements that every dehydrator has. These are the elements that I like to use. What's the temperature for fruit? It fluctuates, but ballpark between 130 Fahrenheit to 140. Mine tends to go between 8 to 16 hours, depending again on lots of other variables, not only water, but also sugar content as well too.
It also depends on not just the type of fruit, but the variety of fruit. So jackfruit, again, for example, comes in a full range. You can get very soft ones that take a little longer because there's a higher moisture content, and you can get what's called the crunchy type of jackfruit, which needs a very short time. And if you did that the same time as the soft jackfruit, you'd have a solid black something that would break your tooth.
You have to have good fruit, good tasting fruit, or vegetable. But if you're going to put overripe or rotting fruit, or underripe, you're going to get just dried underripe, dried overripe, or dried rotten fruit and vegetable. This doesn't change it doesn't change the original product you put in there. What it just changes is the water content of that.
Yeah, so quality in, quality out.
Right. So some other key things, as I said, I like having a timer. When it's done, whatever time I've set, what I think is done, then essentially it'll go off, the power will turn off. And obviously I also like to have temperature because I like to know what I'm doing. As I said, fruits are ranging between 130 to 140. That's a Fahrenheit, and that's a pretty big gap over 8 hours of dehydrating. So I want to fine tune it sometimes. I want to make it high in the beginning, lower, etc. And then
herbs are much quicker, and vegetables are in between.
Yeah, and actually we're going to do later on. We're actually going to demonstrate a veggie chip of dehydrating that. So
yum.
Shall we ready to go? And let's set this for. We'll set this for about 8 hours, and we'll check it at about 4. Temperature 135, and as I said, we'll check it at 4, and then do a couple of things at midpoint to see maybe if you have more than one tray. We only put one tray in, and you have more than one tray, you might want to rotate back, forth, up, down, however your dehydrator works. As I said, there's round ones, fan comes up, no fan. This one happens to be a square one, fan is from the back, so your rotation.
So your back, normally then your back is going to get drier before your front. So when let's just demonstrate this a little bit, because that was something that, being as slow as I am, it took me a while to to understand. So when we're going to rotate, we're going to rotate like that, so that the dehydration part.
You could also rotate it top bottom as well too.
Yeah.
Your bottom tray, heat rises, so your top tray will get a little more heat than your bottom tray, so maybe you want to flip that. But because your middle trays are direct in the fan, they're going to get the most heat, and which means that they'll be drier. And the closest to the fan is the back.
And dehydrators come with different heating elements. You can get anywhere from 600 to I think 2,000, some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah, on the larger home units.
Yeah.
Or
but higher,
quasi-commercial ones like
right.
this.
Well,
so.
Higher is not always better.
Exactly.
Just, it really is, a lot of it is preference. As I said, you know, we chose this. It's a matter of preference. It's stainless, plastic, wear and tear and all of that, you know. You'll see air vents here. You don't want an completely enclosed space. You need good ventilation because as you're blowing, as the hot air is blowing, there is water, moisture, and that has to, it's expelling it out so that it evaporates in the air. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is that if you happen to do oven drying, then you're going to need to crack open the oven a little bit so the moisture escapes. But anyway, those are some of the tips for a dehydrator. And we'll be using this more as we continue. Well, the bananas are ready. And so Ken's going to start pulling them off of the sheet. And then I'm actually going to take one of them and to measure the water content. But you want it to cool down and then you can start taking them off the sheet. And then you go through what's called a conditioning process. The conditioning process can range between 8 hours, 24 hours, and in some cases 7 days a week. And what it does is that for all of the pieces, because some might be a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner, even though you've cut them to 1/4 of an inch or less than 1/4 of an inch, the conditioning stabilizes that water content. So what we're also going to do is we're going to actually take a piece of the banana and I'm putting it into a ball jar. It's a regular size lid, and essentially we have made, which you can buy too, it's a hygrometer built into a regular size ball lid so that we have an enclosed space. What a hygrometer is actually measures the humidity or moisture content of the ambient air. Now you will find a hygrometer is built into your thermostats at home if you have a thermostat in your home. You can buy them they're actually very inexpensive. They do have a little battery, and you can place them into the jar and just make sure that it's closed and wait about, it would be good if you could wait like 1 day, just so that he's measuring just the space or the air that's in there, and since it's in a closed environment, it would take a little bit of while. The measurement you want here is about 52% humidity or less. If you've got less, that means it's drier. If it's not at 52, then you may need to dry it a little bit more. So we will wait a while for this one, essentially just to make sure that we've dried it enough. This was in the dehydrator for approximately, we did set it for 8 hours. It actually was a little less, so I took it out at 6 hours. Because I felt that it was a little, it was dry enough. And
small bananas too.
it was really more the sugar content, which is why I didn't want you to do the green ones, because that would be starchier.
Right.
But you want something that's tasty at the very end of the day.
And different varieties of bananas. Well, look at the numbers are really changing on that.
Yeah,
sometimes.
So before it was at 62, and now if you can see it, it's at 60.
And that's like in a couple
minutes.
Yeah.
So, but you want it to be stable, so
Right.
it may continue to fluctuate over the next, the next half hour or so as we continue to check on the dehydrator for the other things. So, we're now going to do a different fruit. It's actually called water apples, but
New fruit, new gloves.
that's right.
Water apples are pretty fascinating. Syzygium aqueum is the botanic name. Water apples are given to women after childbirth in Malaysia because of their electrolyte content. So you can eat a few of these or drink a bottle of Gatorade and get the same electrolyte advantage. These are white ones that came from Kerala, India, the seeds I brought back. So we've got a couple producing trees here. This crop had so many that they're a little smaller than usual. Usually they're not quite twice the size, but usually they're larger. It's dripping. It's a water apple. So we're going to cut these up, and then you're going to work your magic with them, right?
Yeah, I'm actually going to, and then I'll explain what I do after you cut a few up.
After I cut a few up?
Yeah, but what I wanted to also let you know or tell you is that for dehydration, it is, other than freeze drying, fresh obviously retains all the nutrients, but dehydration actually retains, I think it's between 70 to 80% of the nutrients. Freeze drying is actually a higher level, but freeze drying is a little more, it's not as cost effective if you're doing a dehydration.
Well, it's extremely costly.
So yeah, so when Ken's talking about electrolytes, you would still have in there, again, all you're doing is actually removing the water that we're doing. In this particular case, as I said, he's cutting them into, they're quite small, he's cutting them into 3. And if you look here, we'll measure it again, and it's a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, which is what I said for the bananas. And the reason why we're doing it this way is that I'm actually going to be adding a little element to it. And you can do this to your fruits as well too. We're adding what I've pre-mixed, and it's cinnamon with sugar. So this will be a sugar product because the water apples are a little bit on the tart side. I'm not going to add very, very much, but the sugar will bind with the water molecules that's inside of the fruit, and because it's binding with that essentially as it dehydrates, it's not going to dehydrate the sugar. It'll keep it a little bit more fluffy, which means your water content can be a little bit higher in the fruit itself. When we're talking about water content, what are we saying? Well, how much water did we extract from there? And the way you can measure that is weigh it before it goes in to the dehydrator and weigh everything when it comes out, and that's the difference is over the original weight is your percentage of water loss.
They're really good. They are first cousins of mountain apples and wax jambu. These 3 types of syzygium that we have here are used for a lot of different things in their native environments. Wax jambu worldwide is probably the most popular one, especially in Taiwan. The advantage of wax jambu or wax apple, which is Syzygium samarkensis, is that it has a much longer shelf life than the mountain apples that we're used to, or ohia.
Okay, as you can see,
keep going.
Yeah, just a few more. As you can see, as he's throwing them in there, I'm sprinkling my cinnamon and sugar mix. How much cinnamon, how much sugar, your discretion, really. The other is also, what I also want to show you was that I'm using I am actually using a sheet on top of the dehydrating rack. Now the water apple will produce quite a bit of juice as it's dehydrating, because it's still going to go in between 135 Fahrenheit to 140. So as it's drying, unfortunately, it's still going to actually let out moisture or water. I don't want it to drip through the rack. Plus, the holes are quite large, so I don't want it to fall through.
You ready?
Yeah, you can stop there. I just need a little bit more sugar on here. Sugar and cinnamon. And again, all I'm doing is really...
I can smell it from here. The cinnamon is so good.
As I said, you don't have to do this. You could do just straight dehydrated water apple.
So one of the things too, if you're using your own cinnamon, you go out and you take a piece of branch from your cinnamon tree and you slice the long way and then peel it off, which is what would normally become a cinnamon stick. You could just grate that on a microplane and get fresh local cinnamon on it.
Okay, so if you can see, it's already, some of the liquid is already coming out from the water apple, and that's what's happening. The sugar's already, even though it's not quite dissolved, the sugar is already displacing some of the water that's in there, but it's still quite a bit of water as well too. There's a few parts here that can kind of miss, and I'm going to go through. So easy enough, just place them on the sheet. Try not to have it touch, and actually the difference of this with the banana, if you remember from the banana, I said halfway you kind of could check on it. You can flip the banana over, and in our in the book that we use in our class, So Easy to Preserve, they also recommend that as well too. In this case, what you would do the same, see how it is after half of the time, and then go ahead and just shift them again, just so you get good rotation on them. If you can open up the dehydrator, then I can actually place the tray in there, and we're ready to go. So as you can see, there has no water because of the mat that I've used. And so essentially I'm going to go ahead and just place the tray in here. Go ahead.
Got it?
Yeah, no, just shove it in there. There we go. And again, you'll have to experiment with the fruit that you're using. In this case, it will go a little bit longer because I want the sugars to dry out a little bit more. So instead of the 8 hours, we're going to set it for 10 hours.
Ooh.
And again, I will check it probably midway through just to see how they are. It might be a little bit less. And then the temperature, I want it 135 as well. Okay. So it's not stated, as I know, in any regulation, but in terms of what's the optimal water content for non-treated fruit is usually between 50 to 20% residual moisture, meaning that you can have that as much moisture left for that. For treated, in this case, it will be treated with sugar, and they actually have a measurement for sugar. It's about 25%.
But we're going to show that later on, water activity meters and
absolutely
hydrometers.
And make sure that it's food safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're actually ready for the water apples. Now, keep in mind, remember, the water apples, we coated a little bit in sugar and cinnamon. So it went a little bit longer. We did say for about 8 hours. I checked it, and it actually dehydrated more in 10 hours. Now this one, oh my gosh, look at how tiny they are. Do you remember, if you can remember the size? This is how much, the bananas, if you recall, they stayed pretty much intact in terms of, it has a lot more fiber. Not so much it didn't have a lot of water, there's still a lot of water to it, but it had a lot more fiber, so it kept it pretty close to the original size we put on. But these were predominantly water, essentially, or juice, and very, very little fiber to it. And this is, before you remove them all, what I want to do is...
we got to check them.
Yeah, so again, you would have to go through a conditioning process, and for expediency's sake, we're actually just showing you what we use. And this is a little bit more sophisticated device than what I showed you before. It's called a water activity meter. Now, water activity meter is what most Department of Health and FDA would use, and it measures the free water molecules residual in various dehydrated products. So it has a little sensor in there, and it's protected by a mesh so that whatever you're testing doesn't get contaminated. This particular model takes about 5 minutes to calibrate. It snaps in with a very, very strong magnet. We will turn it on and essentially wait 5 minutes. Now, you can see the numbers are getting calibrated there. It will take a while for it to stabilize. Just so you know how it relates to bacteria, at 0.93 is where botulism or the spore botulinum can grow. And so you'd want anything that's underneath that. But for our purposes here in Hawaii, actually anything less than 0.70 is actually food safe at that point. So if you can get it below that point, that means you're actually good for Hawaii. So this is now continuing to drop. It's now at 0.54. It will probably continue to drop even more, and because it's a sugar product in there, I do want it to go below, as I said, the 0.70, way below that. So I would actually hope that it goes down to even more 0.50. But again, it hasn't been 5 minutes yet, and we'll give that time.
Phenomenal
Here
too.
we do a lot of dried fruits, but
Yeah.
in your garden you have a lot of vegetables that you could actually dry. Now, having said that though, is that you do need to look at, and I would refer to the book that we use in class, So Easy to Preserve.
Yeah.
Vegetables, most vegetables would require some pre-treatment or blanching. You would want to do that because
Salting. to
you
get
could
out
do that as
moisture?
well too. Salting would extract some of the liquid, but you want to do pre-blanching to stop the enzyme action from there
Yeah.
before it goes into the hydrator. This is actually part of the freezing section that we'll be talking about after this as well too, because there's treatments that you could
Yeah.
do prior to.
Would you check this thing and see if we can put it away?
Oh my God, it's 0.48. Got it.
Oh.
And it hasn't even been 5 minutes yet. So
Oh, that's great. Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
0.48. Yes, yes, yes. So we're back, and we're actually going to do the third project. So in one of the other videos that we've done, specifically high pressure canning, we talked about canning vegetables. In this case, actually, we're going to be dehydrating vegetables. This is a, it's already been chopped up. I've kind of sped the process up a little bit. It actually has a Chinese cabbage in there, not Napa, but bok choy. But the little orange pieces are carrots. It also has a little bit of cauliflower and some asparagus as well.
Some green, and oh, that's from the bok choy.
We're also going to using the same mixture that I put together. I blended it, and I made it into a puree. So the puree, you can see the puree, I'm tilting it slightly, doesn't have much liquid. It's pretty thick. It's very similar to if you were going to use fruit and do a fruit puree as well. So while I'm using a vegetable puree, you can also do fruits, and that will be a fruit roll-up. We're going to be doing a veggie roll-up, if you will, and that's what this is.
Cool.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if you could help me to just spread that out a little bit.
I could just spread it on
Yeah,
there.
and while he's spreading, a couple of things.
Do you have should I use a tool, or am I just, since I have nice gloved,
You
new
could actually
fresh
just
gloves?
go ahead and use your gloves, and just try to keep it as one layer as you can with a little bit of air to it so that it would circulate. This is actually what's called, it's a trademark, it's called Silpat. It's a silicone sheet, and the silicone sheet, a lot of chefs or restaurants would use it, a lot of bakers use it because it's a baking sheet. It's good for, I think, up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. I'm not exactly sure, but it's oven safe. And that's what these little round marks are. The round marks are actually cookie shapes. But I don't particularly like using that side, so I actually use the other side. Additionally, it usually has an entire border around it. In my case, I want to make sure it fits into my dehydrator tray, so I've actually cut it. Because I will never go towards the edge, and there wouldn't be any food. But once you cut it, you can actually see inside it's fiber, and then it's silicone coated on both sides, as I said. For a puree, you could use a spoon, you could use a spatula, you know, the silicone spatulas. You could use whatever you'd like, but I like to use what's called an offset spatula, and it actually has a dip here. And I have two. I have a large one and I have a small one. They come in different sizes, and the reason for that, and they actually used a lot for icing cakes. But for me, it's easier for me to spread. Now in this case, I want to kind of use the larger one so that I can spread it, and you can spread a little bit more evenly that way, and it's nice and flat. Again,
wait, sorry. This is just all of the little pieces of veggies that you put through the machine to puree it?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Blender, or what kind of machine did you use?
Actually, I went ahead and I used a immersion blender, a hand blender,
Oh, okay.
as opposed to a household blender. You can, at this point, if you like, while you're blending it, you can add more vegetables. You can add some herbs to it. You can add some spices.
Pieces of veggies, or could you add like these little tiny pieces of carrots and press them into it?
You could, but you'd have to make sure that on the drying part, when it dries, that piece,
Okay.
which is thicker than this,
Right.
is going to be dried. So
Got
you
it.
could have chunkier pieces. I don't, because I actually wanted, as I said, I wanted the outcome of it to be a chip. And what I'm doing here is actually, as I said, I'm spreading it, and you can see it's quite thin. But again, my rule of thumb. Remember the head spacer we use for the banana, and the head spacer we use for the water apple? We're going to do the same thing here. And
Okay.
it's pretty much under a quarter of an inch.
Right.
So I could have it a little bit thicker, but I want to make it as chip. I want it thin. I want it crispy. We could add dried red peppers. You could add some dried garlic, grated if you like, so you spread it out. And in fact, you know, we did before, and
Aha.
we've actually can, if you
Should have
choose
known you had
to.
something hidden under there.
We actually have dried onions, which we've done ourselves. And again, it's just rings of onions that we cut and spread it out and put it into the dehydrator. Then, and for herbs, and onion's not really considered an herb, but for herbs and things like onions, you could dry it at a lower temperature than 135. In fact, you probably want to, because they will tend to burn. The onion would turn brown. As you caramelize onions, the sugars of the onion would come out. Then what I've done is actually I've been growing dill at home, so this has been cleaned and taken off the stem, and then I've dried this, and I could crush this up, or I could spread it on top. But when you and this was actually dried at about 95 degrees, considerably less than what you would do this vegetable chip at. Otherwise, again, it would turn brown, and you wouldn't have much left. Would you like a little?
I'd like a little piece of dill. I love dill. It's probably.
Actually, can we? We'll do it a different way. So let's skip it for now. But there is one other tip that I want to give you for the herbs specifically. If you have a fan in your dehydrator, you may want to cover it with something like parchment paper, which doesn't always work. The other way that you could do is you could take another tray if you have and put it on top of your wet herbs. The reason for that is that as it's drying and blowing, they tend to fly, and they'll fly around in your dehydrator as it's drying. So this might would help to trap it.
That's good to know, because I did have a problem with that once, and
it burnt.
Yeah, it flew into the heating element.
Did it catch on fire?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay,
so
you don't want to do that, and rather than parchment paper, which also does fly as well too, because it's whole, something like this, and put it on top so that it prevents it from.
And it still has air circulation.
Right. Okay, so Ken, if you could, would you?
We're gonna put them in?
Yeah, we're gonna do both, and this will, yeah, so if you can, we're gonna first do my chip, or my veggie puree, let's call it. You could also, not only just the onions and the dill, but you could slice carrots.
Oops.
Okay, you could slice carrots like using the mandolin that we did for the bananas, super, super thin, so that you come out with a carrot chip.
Ooh.
You could salt it ahead of time if you want, and salt will draw a little bit of moisture. But be careful, remember it's dehydrated, so you don't want to over salt. You may want to do that at the end. You could do carrots, you could do beets. If you're going to do like other root vegetables like
kale chips.
Kale and
which is pretty popular these days.
It is. So kale, you'd have to keep in mind that for something like kale, you'd have to like the flavor raw. If not, I would say blanch it first. Same thing with like turnip, parsnip.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pre-cook it, if you will, blanch it a little bit so you don't get that sharp bite. And also it will help to stop the enzymatic action that continues with that. Okay, so this I'm actually, let's set it a little bit lower. It's going to be set at about 100, let's set it at 110.
Okay.
And then we will set it for a total of 6 hours, but I will definitely check it at about 3 because they are already chopped up vegetables. These are the vegetables that actually we dehydrated, and you can see how small they really are compared to when they first started.
But imagine that little packet that you open and throw in there with your noodles. I mean, this is great.
So, and for the chip, how do you know when it's dried? We're actually using a different chip that I had dehydrated. And essentially when you know when it's dry, when it cracks.
You broke it.
But it's really, you can see how thin they are. It was a little under 1/4 of an inch. Remember, we used a head spacer to space it out. And what I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit easier to grab, and so Ken doesn't eat it all in one sitting, because he will take this entire sheet.
You can just cut it.
I'm cutting up some of the pieces. And we've used Ziploc bags to store it. I mean, it's very, very brittle. We've used some Ziploc bags to store. We've used Tupperware, plasticware, whatever you want to do just to temporarily store it. These two, because they are just dehydrated, you don't want it, these will get soggy very, very quickly in our humidity. So you want to be, you want it to be as airtight as much as possible.
You want to take them out and eat them, right?
Well, that too.
I do.
So they are even more delicate than other chips that you would buy. This could be permanent storage, actually, as a mason jar. I would probably say you could do a couple of things with it. You can throw in one of those moisture packs, or, you know, it's called a desiccant gel pack. But I call them temporary storage, because even if you threw this in the refrigerator, there is possibility of moisture going in there over a period of time. Not much, but you would know it from the chip because it won't be crispy anymore. Dehydration is really, it's something that all of us really can do. It's quite accessible. And I think that for dehydration, I get teased a lot because I really dry everything. And really, it's not so much that I dry it because I like the results. I want to see what the results are and whether it can be changed into something else and how I could use the results for something else. So you saw the vegetable chip. You could use whole vegetables. I decided I want to make it into puree. I took the crumbs, I made it into a powder. I can use the powder for other things. You know, you've got herbs here, you've got onions. I've dried mushrooms because I like them in my soups. I like them sauteed, so I'll rehydrate them. And we have a lot of dried goods out there, and especially if they're local, and these are the hamakua mushrooms, and then we grow them locally. I want to be able to preserve or keep them for when I don't have them.
Right.
Ken earlier talked about portion management. He was giving you a small example of the water apple. Well, in my refrigerator, you will find a lot of these little bags, and this is evidence of one of those bags. Now you can ask, what is this? I've made the little bag, and it's probably about 6 months old. It's in my refrigerator, in my vegetable bin. It is 2 carrots worth of dried, 2 carrots. And so I will actually open this up, and I will make a stew, a vegetable stew, a beef stew. Throw this in, it will get rehydrated. And the best part about this is that not only does it absorb the broth, but it doesn't become as mushy as you would have in a normal stew if you use fresh carrots. So key things to remember is essentially for dehydration, you got to be careful about the water moisture that remains, water content. You want to make sure you dehydrate it long enough so that it's shelf stable. And you take into consideration the types of fruit, the types of vegetables, as well as how much sugar content is in there.
And if you really want to try some unique, I mean totally unique, bizarre tropical fruit like Otahiti gooseberry and wampi, look up wampi, Google wampi. It's an amazing fruit, distant cousin of citrus. So can I try the chips already? Please?
Okay. So what we've done is that you saw earlier that we had dill and we had onions. So we went ahead and chopped them up and mixed them into cream cheese so that he could dip the vegetable dip in. You may have to use a spoon because it's quite brittle. So you may not be able to scoop it, so scoop out.
Wow.
Okay, so for the
It is definitely vegetable.
Okay, and what I did with it, just so you know what he's eating, I did tell you what the ingredients were in there, but at the end, the puree that went in, I tasted it before it went in. And as I said, what I'm more interested in is the result. And I added a little bit of lime juice and Hawaiian chili pepper to it, so that you get a little kick.
Wait,
and you get a,
not yet. Gotta go.
Ready?
Cheers.
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 Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's really good.